This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J. A. Carter. Orthodoxy by G. K. Chesterton. Chapter 7. The Eternal Revolution. Part 1. The following propositions have been urged. First, that some faith in our life is required even to improve it. Second, that some dissatisfaction with things as they are is necessary even in order to be satisfied. Third, that to have this necessary content and necessary discontent, it is not sufficient to have the obvious equilibrium of the Stoic. For mere resignation has neither the gigantic levity of pleasure nor the superb intolerance of pain. There is a vital objection to the advice merely to grin and bear it. The objection is, that if you merely bear it, you do not grin. Greek heroes do not grin, but gargoyles do, because they are Christian. And when a Christian is pleased, he is, in the most exact sense, frightfully pleased. His pleasure is frightful. Christ prophesied the whole of Gothic architecture in that hour when nervous and respectable people, such people as now object to barrel organs, objected to the shouting of the gutter snipes of Jerusalem. He said, "If these were silent, the very stones would cry out." Under the impulse of his spirit arose like a clamorous chorus the facades of the medieval cathedrals, thronged with shouting faces and open mouths. The prophecy has fulfilled itself. The very stones cry out. If these things be conceded, though only for argument, we may take up where we left it the thread of the thought of the natural man, called by the Scotch, with regrettable familiarity, the old man. We can ask the next question so obviously in front of us. Some satisfaction is needed even to make things better. But what do we mean by making things better? Most modern talk on this matter is merely argument in a circle, that circle which we have already made the symbol of madness and mere rationalism. Evolution is only good if it produces good. Good is only good if it helps evolution. The elephant stands on the tortoise, and the tortoise on the elephant. Obviously, it will not do to take our ideal from the principle in nature, for the simple reason that except for some human or divine theory, there is no principle in nature. For instance, the cheap anti-democrat of today will tell you solemnly that there is no equality in nature. He is right, but he does not see the logical addendum. There is no equality in nature. Also, there is no inequality in nature. Inequality, as much as equality, implies a standard of value. To read aristocracy into the anarchy of animals is just as sentimental as to read democracy into it. Both aristocracy and democracy are human ideals, the one saying that all men are valuable, the other that some men are more valuable. But nature does not say that cats are more valuable than mice. Nature makes no remark on the subject. She does not even say that the cat is enviable or the mouse pitiable. We think the cat superior because we have, or most of us have, a particular philosophy to the effect that life is better than death. But if the mouse were a German pessimist mouse, he might not think that the cat had beaten him at all. He might think he had beaten the cat by getting to the grave first. Or he might feel that he had actually inflicted frightful punishment on the cat by keeping him alive. Just as a microbe might feel proud of spreading a pestilence, so the pessimistic mouse might exult to think that he was renewing in the cat the torture of conscious existence. It all depends on the philosophy of the mouse. You cannot even say that there is victory or superiority in nature unless you have some doctrine about what things are superior. You cannot even say that the cat scores unless there is a system of scoring. You cannot even say that the cat gets the best of it unless there is some best to be got. We cannot, then, get the ideal itself from nature, and as we follow here the first and natural speculation, we will leave out, for the present, the idea of getting it from God. We must have our own vision, but the attempts of most moderns to express it are highly vague. Some fall back simply on the clock. They talk as if mere passage through time brought some superiority, so that even a man of the first mental calibre carelessly uses the phrase that human morality is never up to date. How can anything be up to date? A date has no character. How can one say that Christmas celebrations are not suitable to the 25th of a month? What the writer meant, of course, was that the majority is behind his favourite minority, or in front of it. Other vague modern people take refuge in material metaphors. In fact, this is the chief mark of vague modern people. Not daring to define their doctrine of what is good, they use physical figures of speech without stint or shame, and what is worst of all, seem to think these cheap analogies are exquisitely spiritual and superior to the old morality. Thus they think it intellectual to talk about things being high. It is at least the reverse of intellectual. It is a mere phrase from a steeple or a weathercock. Tommy was a good boy is a pure philosophical statement, worthy of Plato or Aquinas. Tommy lived the higher life is a gross metaphor from a 10-foot rule. This, incidentally, is almost the whole weakness of Nietzsche, whom some are representing as a bold and strong thinker. No one will deny that he was a poetical and suggestive thinker, but he was quite the reverse of strong. He was not at all bold. He never put his own meaning before himself in bald abstract words, as did Aristotle and Calvin and even Karl Marx, the hard, fearless men of thought. Nietzsche always escaped a question by a physical metaphor, like a cheery modern poet. He said, "beyond good and evil," because he had not the courage to say, "more good than good and evil," or "more evil than good and evil." Had he faced his thought without metaphors, he would have seen that it was nonsense. So when he describes his hero, he does not dare to say the purer man, or the happier man, or the sadder man, for all these are ideas, and ideas are alarming. He says the upper man, or overman, a physical metaphor from acrobats or alpine climbers. Nietzsche is truly a very timid thinker. He does not really know in the least what sort of man he wants evolution to produce. And if he does not know, certainly the ordinary evolutionists who talk about things being higher do not know either. Then again, some people fall back on sheer submission and sitting still. Nature is going to do something some day. Nobody knows what, and nobody knows when. We have no reason for acting, and no reason for not acting. If anything happens, it is right. If anything is prevented, it is wrong. Again, some people try to anticipate nature by doing something, by doing anything. Because we may possibly grow wings, they cut off their legs. Yet nature may be trying to make them centipedes, for all they know. Lastly, there is a fourth class of people, who take whatever it is they happen to want, and say that that is the ultimate aim of evolution. And these are the only sensible people. This is the only really healthy way with the word evolution, to work for what you want, and to call that evolution. The only intelligible sense that progress or advance can have among men is that we have a definite vision, and that we wish to make the whole world like that vision. If you like to put it so, the essence of the doctrine is that what we have around us is the mere method and preparation for something that we have to create. This is not a world, but rather the material for a world. God has given us not so much the colours of a picture as the colours of a palette. But he has also given us a subject, a model, a fixed vision. We must be clear about what we want to paint. This adds a further principle to our previous list of principles. We have said that we must be fond of this world, even in order to change it. We now add that we must be fond of another world, real or imaginary, in order to have something to change it to. We need not debate about the mere words evolution or progress. Personally, I prefer to call it reform. For reform implies form. It implies that we are trying to shape the world in a particular image, to make it something that we see already in our minds. Evolution is a metaphor from mere automatic unrolling. Progress is a metaphor from merely walking along a road, very likely the wrong road. But reform is a metaphor for reasonable and determined men. It means that we see a certain thing out of shape, and we mean to put it into shape. And we know what shape. Now, here comes in the whole collapse and huge blunder of our age. We have mixed up two different things, two opposite things. Progress should mean that we are always changing the world to suit the vision. Progress does mean, just now, that we are always changing the vision. It should mean that we are slow but sure in bringing justice and mercy among men. It does mean that we are very swift in doubting the desirability of justice and mercy. A wild page from any Prussian sophist makes men doubt it. Progress should mean that we are always walking toward the New Jerusalem. It does mean that the New Jerusalem is always walking away from us. We are not altering the real to suit the ideal. We are altering the ideal. It's easier. Silly examples are always simpler. Let us suppose a man wanted a particular kind of world, say a blue world. He would have no cause to complain of the slightness or swiftness of his task. He might toil for a long time at the transformation. He could work away in every sense until all was blue. He could have heroic adventures, the putting of the last touches to a blue tiger. He could have fairy dreams, the dawn of a blue moon. But if he worked harm, that high-minded reformer would certainly, from his own point of view, leave the world better and bluer than he found it. If he altered a blade of grass to his favourite colour every day, he would get on slowly. But if he altered his favourite colour every day, he would not get on at all. If after reading a fresh philosopher he started to paint everything red or yellow, his work would be thrown away. There would be nothing to show except a few blue tigers walking about, specimens of his earlier bad manner. This is exactly the position of the average modern thinker. It will be said that this is avowedly a preposterous example, but it is literally the fact of recent history. The great and grave changes in our political civilization all belong to the early 19th century, not to the later. They belong to the black and white epoch when men believed fixedly in Toryism, in Protestantism, in Calvinism, in reform, and not unfrequently in revolution. And whatever each man believed in, he hammered at steadily, without scepticism. And there was a time when the established church might have fallen, and the House of Lords nearly fell. It was because radicals were wise enough to be constant and consistent. It was because radicals were wise enough to be conservative. But in the existing atmosphere there is not enough time and tradition in radicalism to pull anything down. There is a great deal of truth in Lord Hugh Cecil's suggestion, made in a fine speech, that the era of change is over, and that ours is an era of conservation and repose. But probably it would pain Lord Hugh Cecil if he realized, what is certainly the case, that ours is only an age of conservation because it is an age of complete unbelief. Let beliefs fade fast and frequently if you wish institutions to remain the same. The more the life of the mind is unhinged, the more the machinery of matter will be left to itself. The net result of all our political suggestions, collectivism, Tolstoyanism, neo-feudalism, communism, anarchy, scientific bureaucracy, the plain fruit of all of them is that the monarchy and the House of Lords will remain. The net result of all the new religions will be that the Church of England will not, for heaven knows how long, be disestablished. It was Karl Marx, Nietzsche, Tolstoy, Cunningham Graham, Bernard Shaw, and Auberon Herbert who between them, with bowed gigantic backs, bore up the throne of the Archbishop of Canterbury. We may say broadly that free thought is the best of all the safeguards against freedom. Managed in a modern style, the emancipation of the slave's mind is the best way of preventing the emancipation of the slave. Teach him to worry about whether he wants to be free, and he will not free himself. Again, it may be said that this instance is remote or extreme. But again, it is exactly true of the men in the streets around us. It is true that the Negro slave, being a debased barbarian, will probably have either a human affection of loyalty or a human affection of liberty. But the men we see every day, the worker in Mr. Gradgrind's factory, the little clerk in Mr. Gradgrind's office, he is too mentally worried to believe in freedom. He is kept quiet with revolutionary literature. He is calmed and kept in his place by a constant succession of wild philosophies. He is a Marxian one day, a Nietzscheite the next day, a Superman, probably, the next day, and a slave every day. The only thing that remains after all the philosophies is the factory. The only man who gains by all the philosophies is Gradgrind. It would be worth his while to keep his commercial helotry supplied with sceptical literature. And now I come to think of it, of course Gradgrind is famous for giving libraries. He shows his sense. All modern books are on his side. As long as the vision of heaven is always changing, the vision of earth will be exactly the same. No ideal will remain long enough to be realized, or even partly realized. The modern young man will never change his environment, for he will always change his mind. This, therefore, is our first requirement about the ideal toward which progress is directed. It must be fixed. Whistler used to make many rapid studies of a sitter. It did not matter if he tore up 20 portraits. But it would matter if he looked up 20 times and each time saw a new person sitting placidly for his portrait. So it does not matter, comparatively speaking, how often humanity fails to imitate its ideal, for then all of its old failures are fruitful. But it does frightfully matter how often humanity changes its ideal, for then all its old failures are fruitless. The question therefore becomes this: how can we keep the artist discontented with his pictures while preventing him from being vitally discontented with his art? How can we make a man always dissatisfied with his work, yet always satisfied with working? How can we make sure that the portrait painter will throw the portrait out the window instead of taking the natural and more human course of throwing the sitter out the window? A strict rule is not only necessary for ruling, it is also necessary for rebelling. This fixed and familiar ideal is necessary to any sort of revolution. Man will sometimes act slowly upon new ideas, but he will only act swiftly upon old ideas. If I am merely to float or fade or evolve, it may be towards something anarchic. But if I am to riot, it must be for something respectable. This is the whole weakness of certain schools of progress and moral evolution. They suggest that there has been a slow movement toward morality, with an imperceptible ethical change in every year or at every instant. There is only one great disadvantage to this theory. It talks of a slow movement toward justice, but it does not permit a swift movement. A man is not allowed to leap up and declare a certain state of things to be intrinsically intolerable. To make the matter clear, it is better to take a specific example. Certain of the idealistic vegetarians, such as Mr. Salt, say that the time has now come for eating no meat. By implication, they assume that at one time it was right to eat meat, and they suggest, in words that could be quoted, that some day it may be wrong to eat milk and eggs. I do not discuss here the question of what is justice to animals. I only say that whatever is justice ought, under given circumstances, to be prompt justice. If an animal is wronged, we ought to be able to rush to his rescue. But how can we rush if we are perhaps in advance of our time? How can we rush to catch a train which may not arrive for a few centuries? How can I denounce a man for skinning cats if he is only now what I may possibly become in drinking a glass of milk? A splendid and insane Russian sect ran about taking all the cattle out of all the carts. How can I pluck up courage to take the horse out of my hansom cab, when I do not know whether my evolutionary watch is only a little fast or the cabman's a little slow? Suppose I say to a sweater, slavery suited one stage of evolution. And suppose he answers, and sweating suits this stage of evolution. How can I answer if there is no eternal test? If sweaters can be behind the current morality, why should not philanthropists be in front of it? What on earth is the current morality except in its literal sense, the morality that is always running away? Thus we may say that a permanent ideal is necessary to the innovator as to the conservative. It is necessary whether we wish the king's orders to be promptly executed, or whether we only wish the king to be promptly executed. The guillotine has many sins, but to do it justice, there is nothing evolutionary about it. The favourite evolutionary argument finds its best answer in the axe. The evolutionist says, "Where do you draw the line?" The revolutionist answers, "I draw it here, exactly between your head and your body." There must be at any given moment an abstract right and wrong if any blow is to be struck. There must be something eternal if there is to be anything sudden. Therefore, for all intelligible human purposes, for altering things or for keeping things as they are, for rounding a system for ever, as in China, or for altering it every month, as in the early French Revolution, it is equally necessary that the vision should be a fixed vision. This is our first requirement. When I had written this down, I felt once again the presence of something else in the discussion, as a man hears a church bell above the sound of the street. Something seemed to be saying, "My ideal at least is fixed, for it was fixed before the foundations of the world. My vision of perfection assuredly cannot be altered, for it is called Eden. You may alter the place to which you are going, but you cannot alter the place from which you have come. To the orthodox there must always be a case for revolution, for in the hearts of men God has been put under the feet of Satan. In the upper world hell once rebelled against heaven, but in this world heaven is rebelling against hell. For the orthodox there can always be a revolution, for a revolution is a restoration. At any instant you may strike a blow for the perfection which no man has seen since Adam. No unchanging custom, no changing evolution, can make the original good anything but good. Man may have had concubines as long as cows have had horns. Still they are not a part of him if they are sinful. Men may have been under oppression ever since fish were under water. Still they ought not to be, if oppression is sinful. The chain may seem as natural to the slave or the paint to the harlot as does the plume to the bird or the burrow to the fox. Still they are not, if they are sinful. I lift my prehistoric legend to defy all your history. Your vision is not merely a fixture, it is a fact. I paused to note the new coincidence of Christianity, but I passed on. I passed on to the next necessity of any ideal of progress. Some people, as we have said, seem to believe in an automatic and impersonal progress in the nature of things. But it is clear that no political activity can be encouraged by saying that progress is natural and inevitable. That is not a reason for being active, but rather a reason for being lazy. If we are bound to improve, we need not trouble to improve. The true doctrine of progress is the best of all reasons for not being a progressive. But it is to none of these obvious comments that I wish primarily to call attention. The only arresting point is this, that if we suppose improvement to be natural, it must be fairly simple. The world might conceivably be working toward one consummation, but hardly toward any particular arrangement of many qualities. To take our original simile, nature by herself may be growing more blue; that is, a process so simple that it might be impersonal. But nature cannot be making a careful picture made of many picked colours unless nature is personal. If the end of the world were mere darkness or mere light, it might come as slowly and inevitably as dusk or dawn. But if the end of the world is to be a piece of elaborate and artistic chiaroscuro, then there must be design in it, either human or divine. The world, through mere time, might grow black like an old picture, or white like an old coat. But if it is turned into a particular piece of black and white art, then there is an artist. If the distinction be not evident, I give an ordinary instance. We constantly hear a particularly cosmic creed from the modern humanitarians. I use the word humanitarian in the ordinary sense, as meaning one who upholds the claims of all creatures against those of humanity. They suggest that through the ages we have been growing more and more humane, that is to say, that one after another, groups or sections of beings, slaves, children, women, cows, or what not, have been gradually admitted to mercy or to justice. They say that we once thought it right to eat men. We didn't, but I am not here concerned with their history, which is highly unhistorical. As a fact, anthropophagy is certainly a decadent thing, not a primitive one. It is much more likely that modern men will eat human flesh out of affectation than that primitive men ever ate it out of ignorance. I am here only following the outlines of their argument, which consists in maintaining that man has been progressively more lenient, first to citizens, then to slaves, then to animals, and then, presumably, to plants. I think it wrong to sit on a man. Soon I shall think it wrong to sit on a horse. Eventually, I suppose, I shall think it wrong to sit on a chair. That is the drive of the argument. And for this argument it can be said that it is possible to talk of it in terms of evolution, or inevitable progress. A perpetual tendency to touch fewer and fewer things might, one feels, be a mere brute unconscious tendency, like that of a species to produce fewer and fewer children. This drift may be really evolutionary, because it is stupid. Darwinism can be used to back up two mad moralities, but it cannot be used to back up a single sane one. The kinship and competition of all living creatures can be used as a reason for being insanely cruel or insanely sentimental, but not for a healthy love of animals. On the evolutionary basis you may be inhumane, or you may be absurdly humane, but you cannot be human. That you and a tiger are one may be a reason for being tender to a tiger, or it may be a reason for being as cruel as the tiger. It is one way to train the tiger to imitate you; it is a shorter way to imitate the tiger. But in neither case does evolution tell you how to treat a tiger reasonably, that is, to admire his stripes while avoiding his claws. If you want to treat a tiger reasonably, you must go back to the Garden of Eden. For the obstinate reminder continued to recur. Only the supernatural has taken a sane view of nature. The essence of all pantheism, evolutionism, and modern cosmic religion is really in this proposition, that nature is our mother. Unfortunately, if you regard nature as a mother, you discover that she is a stepmother. The main point of Christianity was this, that nature is not our mother, nature is our sister. We can be proud of her beauty, since we have the same Father, but she has no authority over us. We have to admire, but not to imitate. This gives to the typically Christian pleasure in this earth a strange touch of lightness that is almost frivolity. Nature was a solemn mother to the worshippers of Isis and Sibylle. Nature was a solemn mother to Wordsworth or to Emerson. But nature is not solemn to Francis of Assisi or to George Herbert. To St. Francis nature is a sister, and even a younger sister, a little dancing sister to be laughed at as well as loved. This, however, is hardly our main point at present. I have admitted it only in order to show how constantly, and as it were accidentally, the key would fit the smallest doors. Our main point is here, that if there be a mere trend of impersonal improvement in nature, it must presumably be a simple trend towards some simple triumph. One can imagine that some automatic tendency in biology might work for giving us longer and longer noses. But the question is, do we want to have longer and longer noses? I fancy not. I believe that most of us want to say to our noses, "Thus far, and no farther, and here shalt thy proud point be stayed." We require a nose of such length as may ensure an interesting face. But we cannot imagine a mere biological trend toward producing interesting faces, because an interesting face is one particular arrangement of eyes, nose, and mouth, in a most complex relation to each other. Proportion cannot be a drift. It is either an accident or a design. So with the ideal of human morality and its relation to the humanitarians and the anti-humanitarians. It is conceivable that we are going more and more to keep our hands off things, not to drive horses, not to pick flowers. We may eventually be bound not to disturb a man's mind even by argument, not to disturb the sleep of birds even by coughing. The ultimate apotheosis would appear to be that of a man sitting quite still, not daring to stir for fear of disturbing a fly, nor to eat for fear of incommoding a microbe. To so crude a consummation as that we might perhaps unconsciously drift. But do we want so crude a consummation? Similarly, we might unconsciously evolve along the opposite or Nietzschean line of development. Superman crushing Superman in one tower of tyrants until the universe is smashed up for fun. But do we want the universe smashed up for fun? Is it not quite clear that what we really hope for is one particular management and proposition of these two things: a certain amount of restraint and respect, a certain amount of energy and mastery? If our life is ever really as beautiful as a fairy tale, we shall have to remember that all the beauty of a fairy tale lies in this, that the prince has a wonder which just stops short of being fear. If he is afraid of the giant, there is an end of him. But also if he is not astonished at the giant, there is an end of the fairy tale. The whole point depends upon his being at once humble enough to wonder and haughty enough to defy. So our attitude to the giant of the world must not be merely increasing delicacy or increasing contempt. It must be one particular proportion of the two, which is exactly right. We must have in us enough reverence for all things outside us to make us tread fearfully on the grass. We must also have enough disdain for all things outside us to make us, on due occasion, spit at the stars. Yet these two things, if we are to be good or happy, must be combined, not in any combination, but in one particular combination. The perfect happiness of men on the earth, if it ever comes, will not be a flat and solid thing, like the satisfaction of animals. It will be an exact and perilous balance, like that of a desperate romance. Man must have just enough faith in himself to have adventures, and just enough doubt of himself to enjoy them. End of chapter 7, part 1.